Go against each other once and go into the 3. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. Only 2 teams left remaining here as we go into the grand finals. My name's Jack, and joining me on the desk is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours. And guys, we're finally here to start seeing 2 of the best teams the Eastern region has to offer to us. We've seen them go against each other once and go into the 3 games. Sloot, who do you have taking this?
I think Team D here. I mean, they're so well rehearsed, and they had, both teams have definitely had a bit more practice right now, but the series they had before versus each other was so close. All 3 games, in my opinion, wasn't super indicative of the champions battle for champion there. So I think anyone can take it, but I think Team D is just, I don't know, they seem to get better and better with every map they do.
What do you think about that one, Nagura?
I'm actually going to go for a battle for champions because just because of, Team D sticking to their DK this whole time, even though they did play really well around the DK, but in some dungeons, you're just going to be slower. I think that's also why they lost before, just because they were a little bit slower on the bosses that they had.
To re-killing them again, dealing with the auras that we've mentioned a few times today, making sure you interrupt and chew through the mind controls and dealing with their special abilities. Malady now up to bat for Team D. Battle for Champion now aggroing the Triad, as well as we see Tree of Life already busted out for Jack on the side of Battle for Champion.
Yeah, using that.
Nothing but disappointed if they're not able to win, but when you look at them throughout the year, they definitely know that that is something that's within their reach, being so consistent throughout the entirety of the year. The LAN, a place of pressure for them where they weren't able to take it all down. They want to remedy that mistake. They get a 2-0 to start off today on the main stage, and we hear Gingy in his interview go, yeah, a little bit of a disappointing performance. This team is about winning. There's nothing else to it. But the big thing that we need to actually have in our mind is the idea that you never need to be worried about the second best team. If you're in a position like this that Method EU is in, it's always going to be the person with the X factor, the team that has some unpredictable things that they can bring to the table, and that's going to be the style of Buff War. Tettles, you've said it time and time again, they're the dark horse of this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, Supreme in his interview said that he looks up to Method EU in order to be able to get some of the strategies, but overall, Buff War feels like they innovate a lot of their own stuff too. Coming into this tournament, yeah, like I said, they are the dark horse, they are the unknown, they are here to show if the East can match up pound to pound versus the West.
Yeah, I mean, Supreme, we all know he can do some big damage. We've already seen it. I believe in his guild too. He's the #2 DPS, is ironic.
Wow.
they raid together, there you go.
Yeah, no, I raid with Ironic as well.
Do you though?
Yeah, I was the #1 DPS that we left out there. But taking a look at the key, Ironic, what do you think of this one?
All right, Transmog Officer Rich. Looking at King's Rest, this is a dungeon we saw both teams play earlier this tournament, and Method EU looked lights out. They looked so good on this map. It was the only map that won against Method NA in their 3-game series. Buff War, they had some problems against Abracadabra, so based off past experiences, I would hope that Buff War has practiced this immensely for this match.
You always do prepare. There's usually a lot of footage that you can look at and actually say, okay, this is what we need to be. But when we actually look on the side of Method, they've had that in their minds. I think they've been dark for, 3 weeks now, no streaming. They know that they don't want their opponent to actually figure out what they're going to be able to do. Now, we're going to get into this matchup. Whoever does move on forward is going to have a good shot at the grand final. There are only 2 series left before we do crown our champion. The loser of this one gets sent home.
All right, diving into King's Rest right now, and innovation, these guys going lights out, not streaming their gameplay, not streaming their practice. I'm really excited on this one, Tettles, for a dungeon that is incredibly on the rails. It seems like you're having to pull the same 80-ish% trash, maybe the last, 20, 10%, something like that is going to be a little bit different. I'm very excited to see what 2 weeks of practice with no streaming and no broadcasting of it is going to bring us.
Yeah. So in the games yesterday, Method EU actually did a very risky pull at this first part inside of King's Rest. They actually pull all 4 packs with all of the emissaries and everything else, and they just kind of make sure that they have enough DPS to be able to DPS it down, whereas we actually saw that from no other team. So Method EU here really putting the testament this is going to be like make or break for them right here. If they make this pull, then
this is everything right now. Method EU pulls the entirety of the room and does very well to make sure that Tide's emissary is kept out. We're that fortified, bursting volcanic as we speak, and it is incredibly scary what some of these caster mobs can do. We have 3 witch doctors chasing after the tank, each of them wanting to put out a ton of damage onto him, as well as those champions which do have the enrages. So Zalia with popping his Tree of Life already getting prepared to deal with that bursting.
Yeah, Tree of Life is definitely a pretty underused talent for Resto Druid just inside of this game. Whereas for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here, they're playing it a little bit more safe. They actually don't pull the whole entire room and have to kite it out. So the issue with actually pulling the whole entire room typically is those Witch Doctors, because they have a Shadow Bolt volley cast, which if it actually goes off, it will probably wipe your whole entire group. In addition to that, you don't have multiple soothes for those champions, so now doing a really good job of utilizing Ring of Peace and kiting, making sure the mob stays stacked the whole entire time, and all the while making sure that he did get a little bit damage in to maintain threat throughout the whole entire pull.
That's right, and now with 20% of trash complete, they're going to be spawning the Golden Serpent boss, so they grab some of the Guardians outside and get them ready to go and pull with the Serpent, because those extra Guardians are not too difficult to deal with. You gotta watch out for the frontal, which faces wherever the tank is currently facing. As long as you have a good eye on them, as we're seeing markers going up over everyone's nameplates, it should be very easy to dodge as they take down the Serpent and the boss.
Yeah, so both teams actually are probably going to end up pulling this Emissary of the Tides into the Serpent with both of these Colossus mobs, just making sure that they do dodge out of that frontal, like you were saying. You can actually skip getting that Tides if you pull a specific mob that's in the corner pack, so that was the reason that they weren't really in danger. They actually would have lockouts available for those Shadow Bolt volleys from the first pull. Whereas Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just taking it a little bit slower. They're doing with the Emissary of the Tides, and they are going to start pulling the Golden Serpent in probably like 15 seconds from now.
That's right, and it kind of goes back to, you know, what we've known so much about these teams and almost the fear that they put into their opponents. You know, we've seen JB talk about it time and time again with his Method counterpart on the EU side, where he said, we have to pull, prepare, plan around this team because of what they're able to do.
Do you think that would kind of like get in your head a little bit?
Oh, I think it absolutely does. You have all this pressure on, okay, I feel pretty comfortable with this pull. This one looks really doable. We'll get it consistently. But are we pulling enough?
Yeah.
What are our opponents going to be doing? How are we going to be matching up with them against the bracket? What's our route that we're going to take? I mean, you got to think about it. Early on, FNA is saying, okay, I expect to beat Team Z, as they did yesterday. And they're saying, well, that puts us right up against our Method EU counterparts onto this one, and we have to be able to beat them or we're facing elimination.
Yeah, man, it would definitely get in my head. It's like every single thing you do, you're like, yeah, we're sick. And then you're like, man, they're pulling bigger than us. We suck.
Well, that's the other thing that you have to think about from Buff War's side. They've never played against them, but they have to be able to sort of compare the times, because keep in mind, we've had some affix differences that don't quite make it a one-to-one comparison on that end. So when they're preparing, it's a bit of scary to them, because they're not exactly having everything at their disposal, not having that perfect apples to apples to compare at that end, and Method EU pulling ahead as they take down the Golden Serpent.
I think it's also partially due to the fact that you don't like a war game versus other teams. So like you're actually playing against the dungeon in like a MDI style format, whereas
yeah, we're here. This is the MDI.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But like you're playing against the dungeon as opposed to playing like legitimately versus the
You're
team.
not interacting with your opponents.
Yeah, you're just comparing times, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, you know, it also is very cool to start seeing the respect that these guys are showing for each other, the knowledge of, you know, the type of mobs they have to deal with, the little things we've seen time and time again. That's what Method EU really likes, is when you're looking at them using, we saw it earlier where they're using Ring of Peace and Siege of Oralis to make sure they were knocking back one of the bosses. If they knock it back, it gives them a couple extra seconds. Those things make up a massive amount of their job for this dungeon, for this competition, is knowing the little things, being able to prepare for them, and being able to take them down and work them into their strategies.
So in come the animated guardians. You actually saw on screen Zalia walked out, tagged the animated guardians, also used mass root in order to be able to root those Shadows of Zul. Yeah, the Shadows of Zul, which will actually fear you if you actually get hit by them. They'll probably be walking up a little bit longer. Yep, you see them right off the corner of your screen. Zalia will mass root them again. Of course, whenever we are in this bursting environment, it can be pretty dangerous if you do get those bursted while Zalia or while you have trash going on. So they'll probably end up like shadow melting them off after these animated guardians plus this trash pack goes down.
I really liked what they did there first with the Ursa Vortex. That way he'd be able to ground all of them up, because the way that they got elongated from running all over the place and they were spread out a lot more. Make sure he gets them all stacked together first and then is able to deal with it later. You do see Tree of Light going up for Azalea there, so he might be preparing for that bursting damage if they're going to pop all of those shadows in a second.
I think realistically, the Tree of Life is probably just due to the first pull, right? That seems like that would make the most amount of sense. Just making sure that you get that first pull set up correctly, you can actually spam those instant cast regrowth straight into your tank, which normally, under most circumstances, your tank actually wouldn't need. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue, at the same time doing something very similar. Again, they're just a little bit behind from how much slower they did that first pull.
That's right, and just being able to, it's just one of those things that it's sort of like their route, but you're just missing a couple key elements. How you're taking, 2 pulls, turning it into 1, making sure you're having that higher efficiency is always so important to start watching for these guys. And we've seen time and again, bringing multiple rogues is insanely important to be able to deal with all the skips required in this dungeon, because after the second boss, that bridge is a mess.
Yeah, just utilizing Shadow Melt and Double Shroud. Pretty important. We've seen some teams running like even triple rogue in here. There's some stuff that you can do with like Lightfoot Potion, like straight down the bridge to be able to make it all the way, or you of course have to run triple rogue if you don't want to use a Lightfoot Potion there. And
we have Corrupted Affix coming up next season onto that one. Make it so much easier to be skipping, and I'm excited for that one.
Yeah, that effect actually looks pretty solid overall. Yeah, I'm very excited for that. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue does down their couple constructs. Method U also getting those 2 down. You actually see them actually charging up their Latent Arcana, their Trinket, their Font of Power from Ashara as well. So
I like that they're running that. I mean, again, it might just be towards getting enough damage and getting enough DPS onto specific targets for the very first pull. That might just be what they must have in order to be able to kill it all quickly. But being able to make sure they still have time to wait for some of the roleplay for any of these Room of Kings, the Hall of Kings right here. They're able to still take advantage of it and make sure they clear this quickly so they can move forward.
I think in general, they may have enough time to be able to channel that Font of Power to its full duration whenever now we'll actually be grouping up mobs. But overall, it seems like it would be kind of awkward to be able to channel that thing to full duration whenever you're doing something like an MDI style stuff where everything is just go, go, go. How many mobs can I chain in at once?
It is pretty interesting that he's running it as well, but if you're able to accelerate your route so heavily by taking extra time to be able to get the channel off, be able to pull these larger setups, it's so much easier to take a couple extra seconds with a very heavy burst setup rather than having to put 1 pull and split it into 2.
Yep, and you see the Shadow Melt come through. All of those fixates that you actually did see on the members there go away because they actually drop combat there, and now Method U is going really, really large inside of this Machimba room, getting the constructs and all the embalming fluids with that Emissary of the Tides inside of the group as well.
That's right, and again, Tree of Life going up once again, getting all the HOTS ready, prepared, and set, as they're also grabbing both the Interment constructs. They will have to be dealing with any of the Imprisons that are going to be going out, and Zayli just running circles around any of the goos that are going out, making sure that he's given the rest of the team a lot of space, as getting hit by any of those goos that are chasing Zayli will slow you and add a very nasty poison.
I wonder what they're going to do here with the embalming fluids once they die. For a lot of times we actually do see people running away, as you do actually see all 3 people without immunities actually flee very quickly, running away so they don't get as many stacks of bursting. They get all the way into the corner of the room. They allow the 2 rogues to pop their cloak and do not get stacks.
I was going to say, Jinji popped his Cloak of Shadows first, so I was wondering if he'd pick up a couple extra stacks, but it wasn't too bad, and he was very well pre-hotted, so it wasn't too big of a deal on their end. And that's, again, we've seen that execution for these guys to make sure they're going to be able to get whatever they need, get into that to the position to take those mobs down. The Ursul's Vortex, the extra slows that were coming up on that side were just absolutely enough to make sure they got the job done. And now is going to be a big thing to see if they're going to be able to start making sure Machimba goes down even quicker by getting people out of those coffins.
Why do you think Frag is playing Dwarf versus Jinji playing Night Elf? So in general, in King's Rest, Dwarf Racial will actually move some of the physical damage bleeds, such as those that come out of the Berserkers or Tool of the Butcher. That's normally the reason that you would actually be playing Dwarf Racial, but it's kind of weird to see Jinji on that Night Elf.
I think it could be a little bit weird to see it instead of taking advantage of the Shadow Meld as well, but you might not need it for some of the other effects. You might actually want to have a little bit more escape possible at certain moments, making sure you're saying, all right, well, if there's too much pressure on Zalea, we're going to be able to have a bit of an escape. Or you might just start having Frag be the one who's designated to help out now dealing with Berserkers. You say, all right, he's going to be able to run in, take some of the Berserker cleaves when we don't have Riposte available, or when we don't have any of the stuns available to start shutting out the Berserkers.
And and it kind of looks like Buff War here is losing a little bit more ground. They're still on these purification constructs, whereas Method EU has Machimba the Embalmer down around 30-ish%.
I mean, when you have a better route at your disposal, you're just going to continue to snowball to such great effect. I mean, Frag is Mr. Sweden, but really right now he's showing to be Mr. November.
So they just popped their Bloodlust here.
I like
Machimba's at 30% health. I bet it's so that they can actually skip a phase of the Entomb, so it actually kind of makes sense.
I think right now they were not able to avoid the Entombs entirely, so they just said, we just want to be able to kill this. We want to make sure that we're not getting anything extra after the fact, break him out really quickly. And I think that they're not going to immediately start pulling once they enter the bridge phase. We'll have to see onto that one. But we've seen a lot of teams instantly pull whatever's right in front of them onto the bridge. I'm curious if they're going to start skipping around a little bit, and that's why they're okay with wasting a little bit of the Bloodlust time.
They have a ton of count.
Oh, never. Here comes all the latent Arcanas. All right, I'm interested in seeing what they're going to pull out here. It's about timing for these guys, and we've seen a couple of moments in particular where Method EU has gone faster than their practice routes, and they just didn't have Bloodlust available for them. So they might have just said, hey, we just need a Bloodlust on cooldown.
So this is actually hilarious. They actually ended up pulling both of those packs there. Most of the time you'll elect to not pull the Emissary.
Now he's got 3 stacks of the bleed onto him. Zaley does get the res up very quickly. We are going to see a couple of riposts coming up from Frag to make sure that he's going to be able to survive some of the incoming damage. But that was very scary. He was not able to dodge, stun, avoid any of those bleeds. But they are stabilized in the group. You're seeing Cenarian Ward going up on now, so he'll have a ton of healing as the Life Bloom and Reju follow.
Yeah, that's why that pull is pretty dangerous, and you actually had Xaylia rooting the tides out of the pack, using his Tree of Life instant cast roots to be able to deal with that pretty easily. Maybe there was just an issue of just healing throughput on the tank. Now actually died with Last Stand and Spell Reflect available to him, so I kind of wonder what actually ended up occurring there.
There's that 3-stack bleed to the Berserker onto that one. He was just so heavy. It was just so much damage that was going out onto him, and if you're going to be having casters getting any extra damage off as well, it just adds more problems to them. But again, they've shaken off, they've taken care to make sure they're not going to be, letting these mistakes get to them. Love that Ring of Peace as the Shroud goes up, and they are just speed potting to get to their last boss room.
Yeah, so Brutes, especially in MDI scenarios, big, like really large time sink just because of the uptime not available on them. So we've actually seen a lot of teams historically just looking to skip them. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue is making its way into this room. They're actually in MDI scenarios.
3-stack bleed to the Berserker onto that one. He was just so heavy. It was just so much damage that was going out onto him, and if you're going to be having casters getting any extra damage off as well, it just adds more problems to them. But again, they've shaken off, they've taken care to make sure they're not going to be, letting these mistakes get to them. Love that Ring of Peace as the Shroud goes up, and they are just speed potting to get to their last boss room.
Yeah, so Brutes, especially in MDI scenarios, big, like really large time sink just because of the uptime not available on them. So we've actually seen a lot of teams historically just looking to skip them. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue is making its way into this room. They're actually doing a little bit different of a pull. They're actually skipping the first 3-pack, and they're actually doing the back 2 mobs as Ching actually does go down, and looks like Marito also has fallen as well. So that's going to be really bad for Buff 4 Nerf Rogue.
That's right, just chalking up all these extra deaths. They should be in range for the mass res if they're going to be able to avoid the Brute's patrol. But one of the things that's so important to look at for this is that you got to make sure you know exactly where the Brute's going to be for all the timings. That way you'll be able to get past them. I mean, we saw it on the side of Method EU. They knew where the Brute was going to be, Ring of Peace it out of the way. That way they could shroud around it without a hassle.
Yeah, it's definitely being interesting. So you actually see Method EU here. They pull some of the Berserkers into Kula the Butcher here. They actually were able to deal with that pretty easily, just making sure that they ended up using any of their Dwarf racials, any of their defensives whenever Kula is casting that Whirling Axe onto them. That is fairly important. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue has got that Mass Res off and is trying again, just making sure that if for some reason Method EU did have a pretty catastrophic mistake here, they would be able to capitalize on it. The Spectral Berserker has finally entered the arena where Method EU is currently fighting, but they do have it paralysis off to the side.
I like that. They actually grabbed one off the pole, brought it in with Kula as they had all the damage and cooldowns available to them, and then they just offered to para it. They got Latent Arcana's channeling as they're ready to start the second round, and I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing the Berserker come in soon.
Yep, so you actually did see Gingy there use his Riposte to be able to, what was it, like a dodge?
Yeah, it's to be able to parry any of the incoming damage from the Berserker, to just parry any of the debuffs there. Makes it so that the tank's going to be having a much easier time dealing with it here.
Yeah, so that's how that's going. Xaylia is actually doing an incredible amount of damage on this fight that historically requires a large amount of healing.
Well, I think on that end, that's where you're taking advantage of the Shadow Melds, you're taking advantage of any of the racials and the dodge effects that are available to you to make your life that much easier to be able to bring them down. Really love the big focus onto that Earthwall Totem once they took care of the explosive. They split their focus, that way they'd be able to take down the 2 most annoying or deadly totems first and make sure that they're not having that constant shielding stacking up.
It looks like Ching actually ended up falling whenever they were actually doing their their shroud skip throughout that, so he's getting mass res here. Again, that's
just more time that it's eating up right now, and those are the mistakes you just can't make because King's Rest requires such precision here.
Yeah, overall this dungeon is actually pretty insane. You guys see Aka Ali being pulled here. I wonder when they're going to actually pull the Berserker here. As it is parried off to the side, maybe pulling it like at the very bottom of Aka Ali will be...
I would imagine they'd start, if any time, it would be right now as you're seeing Mirrors running into position to be able to go grab it. So he does ping it and starts sending it unless he runs over
I think he
Paris
just repaired.
Okay, I
yeah.
guess he just repaired. Might just be that they don't have to deal with it at all because they have 84%. They're going to be able to get another 4-ish out of Shadow of Zul onto that end. So it might just be leaving it, grabbing all the other mobs because they're going to be upstairs once the cutscene ends, and then just shadow melding it off. I mean, you're going to have a Berserker already in that upstairs pack, plus you have Beastmaster, Honored Raptor as well. So you have a lot of other deadly mobs that should be enough trash for them, I would think.
But I mean, this would be efficient to do, right? I mean,
it would be, but there's the added threat that you're not quite going to be able to deal with some of those bleed debuffs if you're having the tank kiting, for example. If any time that you would want to bring the Berserker in, you bring one in for Kula like they did, and then bring the second one in for the Totem that they have in second. So,
yeah, so
I think at this point they're just going to refresh that para once again, and they're just going to skip it entirely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Whereas on the side of Buff 4 Nerf Rogue, you actually do see a para coming out on their Berserker
Yeah, there
as
was
well.
the Shadow Meld.
Okay, so yeah, the Shadow Melt, everybody channels their Latent Arcana, and they're actually doing this pack with the Emissary of the Tides.
Yep, and Emissary of the Tides usually isn't too terribly deadly. You got the Hex Priest with damage going out, but Spell Reflect does come up early, and we'll probably expect to see Last Stand or Shield Wall. Either of them available. Maybe, and if they have the healing at their disposal, if they're not too worried about that dot damage coming in from the Berserker, and they have a reasonable way to be able to avoid the second dot. Oh, there's Last Stand. I was about to say, I think that they're going to have to use one cooldown and then save the other one for the Shadow of Zul.
Yeah, Shadow of Zul is pretty dangerous towards Protection Warriors because they only have that Spell Reflect to be able to deal with magic damage. Of course, they do have flat DR from like Shield Wall. They also have some HP that they can get from like Rallying Cry and stuff like that. But overall, Protection Warrior not exactly the greatest tank at dealing with the Shadow of Zul. But on this 18 fortified setting, all of these tanks are pretty well equipped to be able to deal with it.
That's right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a lot of single target healing to make sure that your tank is going to be surviving. And I love the control that we're seeing for that Honored Raptor. They're shutting it down in as many ways as they can. First we saw the Ursul's Vortex, then we're just seeing Typhoon coming up, then we're seeing Ring of Peace coming up. Actually, they don't have Typhoon, sorry. They were seeing the Ring of Peace coming up right there to make sure that they're shutting it down, getting that Raptor back into it, and nobody's getting cleaved.
Yeah, Buff 4 Nerf Rogue here is going to be downing Zanzal. They're going to start on Aka Ali as well, but it looks like it may just be a little bit too little too late for them. They're pretty far behind.
I think that at the beginning, Method EU started the snowball and have continued to be able to build that snowman right now because Shadow of Zul's in their sights. Otherwise, they will be complete with trash and they will be able to take this game number one because they have been so clean and so efficient, even with one death.
You've been hanging out with Sleep too much.
From time to time. Yeah, we only raided together.
So what do you actually think about the Tree of Life coming in from Xaylia inside of this dungeon?
I think that one of the biggest things that this has kind of started is, oh, I saw them running this for MDI. Are we supposed to be running this for live keys? And where does the debate come in? Since the backbone of all of your trash percentage is coming from these large attempts from pulling everything in the Golden Serpent's room. You need to be able to have this thing at your disposal. You need to be able to have Tree of Life to consistently be able to have the throughput. Yes, you can be able to pull it away with Cultivation. It does give you that extra hot stack for your mastery to take advantage of it, but I think it's an unnecessary risk to not take it in a dungeon like this because of how big that Method EU is going.
Yep, and Shadow of Zul does go down, and they actually end up killing that one last minion of Zul. They're going to be making their way towards this Void Touch Emissary. Maybe they'll melt it off, maybe they'll just stay in combat with it. Doesn't really matter either way.
Yeah, pretty much. At that point, once they get their pre-pots off and stuff, they don't really have to worry about melding if they don't need to. At that point, and they can maybe just use it for something a little bit later. Like if they're going to get jumped on, for example, from King Dazar, they could just hold their Shadow Meld for that point and avoid the jump entirely. That way they don't have to worry about it, as it happened right there. So we're seeing Xaylia getting it instead of the melee, uses his Wild Charge to be able to get back and reduce the damage that he's taking. So they can just weave it in whenever they need to.
Yeah, you actually see Buff Warner Frog here doing one of the final trash pulls that they actually need to do prior to pulling the Shadow of Zul. But again, they're just so far behind. They're basically just praying for a wipe from Method EU here.
And I don't think it's going to be that easy, as we're seeing King Desar getting down to 70%. They're just offering light cleave damage onto Raban, because as we saw with that Raptor before they encountered Zul, they are masters at shutting this mob down or kiting away from it.
It's kind of interesting how far behind Buff War actually ended up falling after the second boss here. You can actually just kind of see their splits, the split times at the bottom of the screen. Just those deaths where you had to mass res multiple times. Loda had that pretty clutch play where he melded and then had to mass res the whole entire group. They just had major issues on the bridge but their issues actually began in the first boss room as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is just, yes, it'll be tough to be able to deal with the first boss room, tough to deal with certain pulls, but it's always on that bridge where you start losing the most time. Previously, it was, you know, okay, we're 30 seconds, we're a minute behind, something like that, and that just gap just absolutely expands to a monumental level when there is just so much that you have to deal with and so much on the line when you pull any of those bridge packs.
Yep, and you actually do see the Bloodlust coming out for Method EU for the final few percent of Desar.
See, this is it. They were going too fast. They were just going too quickly throughout the dungeon. Like, they would have loved to be able to Bloodlust when Sala came out, for example, but they were just going so much faster than the route. They're like, all right, we're gonna get Bloodlust for some point of Desar, where it probably will be at the very, very tail end, and it'll be worth it for them.
Yeah, these guys were talking about how the feeling of actually hitting your best time run whenever you actually are on the stage is some of the best feelings possible. And overall, this Method EU run was very, very smooth.
Absolutely dominant as they do take down King Desar and do seal game number 1. King's Rest.
You know you're in a pretty good scenario when you're going to hear the casters saying, yeah, I guess the run was a little bit too smooth, just a little bit too fast coming out from them in a race. We're definitely seeing Method EU look fantastic. The thing is it just seems to be one of those scenarios as well where it's not their opponents necessarily messing up, it's just how on earth do you keep up, Zyronic?
I mean, we're back there trying to find good clips to show what happened in this match, and these guys, they just didn't make any mistakes, barring one death from now to the Berserker. These guys just did everything perfectly, and they were going for the strongest pulls. Just starting in this first boss room, they pulled literally everything in the room on their first pull. No deaths, perfect pull. Later on, they just keep going through the dungeon completely perfectly. I mean, this is Method EU at its finest, and, you know, I was talking earlier about how these guys are happy they're in the lower bracket because they get to get comfortable on stage. If they're looking like this in their second match of the day, I'm scary to see what they're like in the next match, maybe even in the grand final later.
They're just machines. I mean, when we bump into them backstage, they're like, yeah, we're happy because we get to play 1,000,000 matches today on the main stage. and that's what we feel the best. Like, Gigi said it to me first thing this morning, then we saw him backstage, and the rest of the team echoed that sentiment. Do you think that they do get scarier, Jack, when they're going to be able to get more and more reps on the main stage?
I think if they're well rested and they're well prepared like they look to be right now, you have to keep in mind what's their practice schedules usually like. It's taking up the majority of the day, and they're saying, well, we know the points where we get better. We talked to Method NA as an example, and they know, okay, about the time we stop practice is the time we're playing the worst for it. And it's hours and hours later, right? For games like this, 6 to 8 hours of the day, they just seem to get hotter and hotter, and it shows in a very difficult dungeon.
Now, folks, we have everybody taking the stage. They are in front of that crowd, and the question is whether or not that pressure is going to affect them. I know for a lot of people, when you're in scenarios like that, you go to your happy place, whether it's an island in your head.
What's your happy place?
I'm not allowed to talk about it. No! But the thing is everybody has their happy place. And when we talk about Dr. J, his happy place is the J-Crest Manor. Do you think that this map is going to be enough to extend this series? Ironic, do you think that we might actually see something go all the way to game number 3?
These affixes are nasty. I mean, this is anyone's game. Sanguine and Quaking on Tyrannical in this map, people could go instantly down.
All right, we're going to have to see. This would be the first series to go all the way to game 3, but one more time, folks, you need to think about